In conversation with Rebecca Rosenberg. Rebecca Rosenberg is a Champagne enthusiast, lavender farmer, an Amazon chat best-selling author of historical novels about extraordinary women, including the Champagne Widow series about the real women who revolutionized the world of champagne. And on today's episode of Photo Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy and excitement to have on the show today, Rebecca Rosenberg. How are you doing, Rebecca?
Good. Cheers to you. I don't know what time it is there. I think it's a little
Well,
later in the afternoon.
I don't have a cup in here, but I have a bottle of
I know
water.
you have to have your water in a bottle, but I have to have a beautiful champagne glass.
Oh,
And this
interesting.
is called a tulip champagne glass. That
Oh,
is the shape. And I have two others to show you because I'm all about champagne.
oh,
This
wow.
one is called a coupe by the famous Moet and Chandon company.
Oh,
And
goodness.
this one is a flute. So the long ones are
Mm.
flutes. So
Looks like
those are the three champagne glasses that you can drink from.
looks like our viewers has got a lot to drink from, really. Well, I don't have one close to me because it's over the internet. I'm gonna drink the water.
Okay, good.
Interesting, really. I mean, this is quite fun. It's an amazing way to start an interview conversation. I love your energy already,
Are
Rebecca.
you um are you a champagne lover? Have
Well,
you had much champagne?
not much actually that I can think of, but I do a lot of water.
Okay, very good. Well, guess what? There's a lot of water in champagne.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So maybe you should switch. Maybe you
Oh,
should
well,
just switch.
I
Okay.
will think about that.
Okay. You can try it.
Thank you so much. This is quite beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. So, Rebecca, I need to first say that I was taken aback by your body of amazing literature works, and I would like us to start today's conversation with one of your books titled Champagne Widows, which is part of the Champagne Widows biographical novels. I would like to ask you the many obvious questions most authors get asked. What inspired you to write this book?
What inspired me was champagne
Interesting.
because this drink, it has been a world famous drink for hundreds and hundreds of years, and
Oh,
it comes to us from only one country. And do you know that, Peter? You can only have champagne from France. It has to come from that Champagne region. And so I love champagne. And
wow.
when I kept visiting Champagne, France, I just became enamored with the first woman who started champagne, and that is Veuve Clicquot.
Oh,
And you people will recognize this beautiful orange label. And I found out that she was from the 1800s. From 1800s, she started making champagne, and it was
mm,
almost impossible because women were not even allowed to have businesses, and yet
wow.
she found a way to do it. Now, do you know her name was Veuve Clicquot? Do you know what Veuve means?
Oh no. I think you said that's a French name, right?
It is a French name, but veuve means widow. So
Oh,
that means her husband died, and
oh,
that's why she had the right to have a business and make champagne. So
wow.
it was so important for her to stake her claim because she was the first woman in the entire world to make champagne that she
Interesting.
called her champagne Veuve Clicquot or Widow Clicquot. It's really super fascinating. And this is the book that I wrote about her. And you see, you've got a champagne cork and a woman riding that cork
Yeah.
through time. So this is an actual antique poster from that era.
Wow.
Um, and that's how they used to sell champagne and with these beautiful champagne posters. So
Wow.
I loved to feature that on my cover.
Oh, wow. That's quite beautiful to know, really. I love your introductory answers, background history into the making of your book. I love the conversation around champagne, the conversation around the first woman in the world to make a champagne, which I'm quite not aware of. I like the fact that you're even taking a sip over there. That's quite beautiful. That's a lovely
I've got
compliment you've
my
got in there.
Now, I will admit that I'm drinking sparkling water today, not champagne, but Still, cheers.
Cheers. That's quite beautiful, really. Thank you. That's a beautiful introduction, a lovely introduction. And I love the sound of the book, the love of the champagne, and everything imbibed you've mentioned so far. Thank you. And I also wanted to ask you, what inspired to write about Veuve Clicquot, which I think you just mentioned, the first woman of champagne. Also, what were Veuve Clicquot's major challenges in making champagne, if you're aware of any?
Well, sure, there were. I want to show you, I have a couple of show and tell pictures, and
Yeah.
these, I'll get the glare off of it if I can.
Oh,
These are the three most famous women that ever made champagne,
wow.
and they are all widows, and they
Oh,
had that in common. And so
wow.
that's why I started writing this series of books about the widows of
Oh,
Champagne. And they
wow.
are, this one in the middle is Veuve Clicquot, and that's a terrible picture of her. I have a better idea of her that I'll show you next.
Okay.
But this was made quite late in her life when she was in her 80s, and it looks like she had gotten quite heavy. But she was the first woman of Champagne. And then you
Wow.
have the one over here. Let's get her. This was Madame Pommery, and
Oh,
this is
wow.
her champagne. So if you've seen this beautiful blue label,
Yeah.
this is one of the most popular champagnes in the world, and
Oh,
that is Pommery. And that was the
yeah.
second book that I wrote.
Oh,
And
wow.
then I have a third book about this woman, a more modern book, and that
Mm,
is about Bollinger. So these three women are the three most famous women who have ever made champagne, and all of their stories are completely different. I was
mm,
totally fascinated to learn that. And you asked about challenges. All of their
wow.
challenges were completely different because they lived in different times. So you had Veuve Clicquot, this one, Champagne Widows.
Yeah.
Veuve Clicquot lived in 1800s, so she lived during the Napoleon Wars. The
Mm,
Napoleon Wars, where he was actually trying to take over all of Europe, much like
wow.
Hitler. We more know the story about Hitler taking over, wanting to take over. We
Yeah.
don't think of Napoleon, but he waged 15 years of wars against all the countries in France and
Wow.
even some of the African countries like
Wow.
Egypt, where he wanted to take over. And so
Wow.
she had to live during that period and she knew him. So this book, The Champagne Widows, tells that whole story of her battle really with
Mm,
Napoleon to get her champagne out into the world. It's a very fun struggle because
wow.
Napoleon, is quite a historical figure. So it took a lot of research to know what he was doing in what countries and how it affected her in making her
Wow.
champagne.
Oh, wow. I need to say that you've got such an uncommon inspiration method of getting inspiration. I'm quite intrigued by the way you sit back and take the story of these three widows and look at the similarities, and you're able to craft a story, write a book of it. I mean, for you to have done that, I think I'm not quite sure if there are other books in this genre category, but I find it to be quite intriguing, really. Such an amazing inspiration and ideas to have even bump into that and say, let's write a book about women in Champagne. Let's write book about women in this category, and it's quite beautiful, really. Very amazing.
One series that I want to do in the future
Yeah.
will be about the women pharaohs in Egypt. There were
Oh,
5 women pharaohs in Egypt, and I'm going to start researching that next year. So that idea of taking certain, I like to write about women because I'm a woman, but it could
yeah,
be about men also. But these
yeah,
are women who took it in their hands to get involved with champagne, which was totally, totally a male-oriented business.
yeah.
Yeah, but they lived like Veuve Clicquot. Here's a prettier picture of how I imagine her. So
Oh,
she grew up in the beautiful vineyards of Champagne, and I have a picture of that too. I've been to Champagne 6 times, so look at how
oh,
gorgeous that is. And
yeah.
she grew up in that territory, and
Wow.
she was actually quite wealthy. So why wouldn't she dream of making this delicious drink that Dom Perignon famously said, "I'm drinking the stars." It's so effervescent and
Mm.
light and makes you happy. And so she really was bound and determined that she was going to make champagne no matter what Napoleon threw her way.
Mm. Oh, wow. And that's one of the things that makes him to be quite exceptional with the fact that this is like a male-oriented business, but we have these women who come together and distinguish themselves. It makes them to be quite exceptional in their own way. That's very amazing.
Especially
Continue.
because they're from 1800s.
Yeah, you know,
Really very different than
very
today.
different.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Now let's talk about Veuve Clicquot and also that of Madame Pommery. What surprised you about Veuve Clicquot, and also how did the story of Veuve Clicquot differ from that of Madame Pommery? Would you like to talk about
Okay.
that?
Yeah, sure. So, Veuve Clicquot, which is this orange label,
Yeah.
the orange label, she was only 24 when her husband died, and
Oh,
she took over the old family winery that actually was making red wine. So she wasn't even, she had no idea how to make champagne. So
oh
that
wow.
was really gutsy. But she had, like I said, she was quite wealthy. She came from a wealthy family who her father owned a wool factory of 1,000 employees. So she had
Mhm.
vineyards and she had money in order to start her champagne. Plus, her father was the mayor of the Champagne capital. And so
Wow.
he was very connected with Napoleon. So she had a lot of benefits. And that's why I
Oh.
say she knows Napoleon. So this story, Champagne Widows, is a really fun kind of arm wrestling with
Mm.
Napoleon. And actually, she did commit, true story, she
Yeah.
committed a treason
Oh
of
wow.
Napoleon because she was able to ship her champagne on an American ship. She disguised it by shipping it on an American ship, and
Mm.
she disguised it as coffee and chocolates. And
Oh
she
wow.
sent it to Russia, which was his Napoleon's enemy, and
Mm.
Napoleon found out. So she could have actually even been killed
Oh
for what she
wow.
did. But
Wow.
she was amazingly brave, and I love
Wow.
that about her. Now,
Yeah.
the story, how it differs from the story of Madame Pommery,
Mm.
is Madame Pommery was 42 years old when her husband died, and she had never worked. So that's a
Mm.
whole different woman, and she had
Yes.
2 children. So, how does she decide that she's going to all of a sudden make champagne? And
Mm.
actually, the reason I believe that she did do that is because she lived in the same town as Veuve Clicquot,
Mm.
except Veuve Clicquot by then was a very old woman. And so she actually, Madame Pommery goes to Veuve Clicquot and she asks her about starting champagne. And she has a different idea about making champagne. In the
Wow.
time of Veuve Clicquot, champagne was very, very sweet, like a
Oh.
sugary, sweet, heavy drink. Heavy, heavy with yeast. It was like a mead or something like a heavy beer.
Mm.
But Madame Pommery wanted it to be light and she wanted it to be dry instead of sweet. And in fact, she wanted to sell it to the UK, um, and they like their drinks drier. So she had that idea, and she went to Veuve Clicquot, and Veuve Clicquot helped her. So I do want to tell you really a crazy, funny story
Yeah,
about
let's do
Madame
it.
Pommery.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is, you asked me what surprised me. So Madame Pommery was in a different war called the Franco-Prussian War, and the Prussians had infiltrated all of France, and they actually were living in her house
Mm.
and in her company while she was trying to make champagne. And all the soldiers were stealing her champagne and
Oh
drinking,
wow.
guzzling it up, And so she had to save it somehow. But how
Mm.
could she? She's a single woman. She's a widow, she's defenseless. And so, what she did, get this, Peter, she hid her champagne under the city dump
Wow.
where they like the trash where all the trash and garbage went, the city
Wow.
dump. He dug these craters, these
Oh,
are caves under the city dump, and hid all the champagne there so that they
wow.
could not find it. So
Wow.
I just think these women were unbelievably brave and
Very,
very
very.
ingenious in order to figure out how to do that. And so when
Wow.
you go to visit Champagne,
Yeah.
you can see all these different caves with all the champagne hidden because
Mm.
France had to go through lots and lots of wars with the Germans. And
Yeah.
so they kept having to hide their champagne through World War I, through the Franco-Prussian War, and through World War II. All three of these widows had to hide their champagne from
Wow.
the Germans.
This is quite amazing. Very wholesome and very beautiful. I love your description of this and I love the storyline. I love the things that interest you most about it and how they differ from person to person. That's quite amazing, really. Thank you for sharing with
Tell you
us.
one other thing that
Yeah.
amazed me about Madame Pommery, and that is here. And everybody, you can find these books on Amazon, so they're easy to find.
Yeah.
But Madame Pommery decided that she didn't want to make her champagne in just a warehouse or a cave.
Yeah.
She wanted to have a beautiful place that she could invite her customers to come and taste the champagne. And so she was the first one who ever made a beautiful tasting room and winery. And
Mm.
this is the winery. So she made
Ah.
it like a castle,
Wow.
almost like a storybook castle. And you could still see this today in Champagne, France. Isn't that beautiful?
Very beautiful.
Yeah. So today we might not think anything of this, especially since you live in the UK, you see lots of castles. But in Champagne, they had not started building this kind of thing. So
Mm.
I give her credit for doing
Ah.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful one, really, and I love your take on that. That's quite beautiful. You've got quite a lot of attractive stuff to say about Pomery.
Yeah, I liked Madame Pommery because again, she was 40 years old, but she had to support her children, and she did not come from money like Veuve Clicquot did, so
Wealthy.
she didn't have the money to really do that.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. That sounds like a very dedicated, quite inspiring story, even.
Very inspiring,
Very
inspiring,
inspiring. Yeah.
inspiring me to at least work hard enough to get her story down so
As a
people could
woman,
understand.
even,
Yeah,
and as a widow, it's really inspiring.
yeah.
Very inspiring. And now she has made a name for herself, you know.
She has, and it lives today as one of the top 10 wines that there
Amazing.
are. And look how beautiful it is.
Yeah. I've seen that
Well,
before. Yeah, it's quite popular
yeah,
even in Nigeria, all over the world. Yeah.
yeah,
Pomery.
I have. I was in Nairobi last year, but I didn't get to Nigeria, so I don't
Oh,
know. But they had Veuve Clicquot for sure in Nairobi.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, they did.
Oh, that's
And then there's
beautiful.
a third widow that I'm writing about now, and the
Yeah.
book is coming out. And the third widow is Bollinger.
Oh,
And what's fun about her, you've heard of James Bond, right?
yes,
James
absolutely.
Bond. Okay. Well, James Bond favorite champagne is Bollinger.
Oh,
So Bollinger champagne was in 16 different James Bond films. And so
oh,
there's a very exciting connection between Bollinger and James Bond. And I am going to show you the new cover of that book, which I just finished. So it's License
interesting.
to Thrill, playing off the James Bond and
Wow.
Lily Bollinger. So she is more modern. This story is in the 70s, like
Oh,
1970. So
wow.
that's fun that I get to write about a more modern widow. And do you know
Mm.
what this woman is doing, Peter?
Yeah.
What is she doing?
She's pumping up the, what's it called? She just opened the bottle and the thing flies up. Yeah.
But you know what she's popping it off with is called a saber.
Oh,
And so
really?
it's a long saber, like a long sword.
Oh,
And that is a tradition in Champagne where you lop off the top of the bottle
okay.
with
Without
a
having to
long
use the
sword.
Sadaki order. Oh,
Yeah, in fact, Napoleon invented that. He would come
wow.
into town when he would take over a town and they would just steal all the champagne and lop off the tops and drink the champagne. So I wanted something exciting for the cover of this new
This is
book.
very
And
captivating, even.
yeah, and see all the vineyards in the back.
Yeah, the
So
background is amazing. Address is something else.
I
Interesting.
like it. Well, I love when I create a book, I love the art to be part of it.
That's really amazing. And I like the fact that you've got so many artworks around your books.
I do. Yeah, everything's art. Like this one, the Madame Pommery, that is an actual champagne poster. That's
Oh,
actually, I have a huge one that's sitting right next to me, and this is actually in the Pommery winery when you go to France. Yeah, I love
wow.
art to be part of it.
Yeah. It's all part of, it's all part of art, writing, literature, painting, drawing, pictures, etc. It's all part of
Poetry like you write, your
poetry, all
poetry.
part of art. Beautiful work, amazing collections, great answers to the questions. I love it wholeheartedly. Thank you. Thank you. I love the fact that you keep sipping off that time to time, intermittently.
I'm pretending. I'm
It's giving the
pretending.
champagne vibe. Thank you. There you have another book in the name of The Secret Life of Mrs. London, whose description page in Amazon reads quite compellingly to me. For readers who haven't read that yet, and without giving much information away, could you tell us some of the themes and subject lines we'd expect picking up The Secret Life
Excite.
of Mrs.
Yeah.
London?
What's exciting about this is that it is about the love triangle between Houdini. You've heard of Houdini, right?
Oh, no.
Harry Houdini, the
Yeah, yeah,
magician.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I have.
So Harry Houdini, the magician, who was really the most famous man in the world at the time of
Wow.
this, which was about 1915,
Yeah.
and Jack London, who's a very famous author, and he
Mm.
was known worldwide as well, and his wife, Charmian London. So it's about the love triangle between these three very, very famous and complicated people.
Mm.
And so it's a lot of fun. This was my first book that I wrote.
Oh,
So it's been out for a while, and now right now I have a new book coming out,
wow.
and that is part of a different series. And that
Interesting.
is the Gold Digger series
Oh.
and the Silver Echoes. And this is all about gold mining,
Mm.
a whole different thing. So I wrote about champagne, and this is all about gold mining. And this new one, Silver
Mm.
Echoes, is about the 1920s and Prohibition. And
Mm.
this is a true story as well. She
Yeah.
is a motion picture star and a burlesque star.
Oh,
Do you know
wow.
burlesque,
Yeah,
Peter?
I do.
Okay, burlesque is where you've got women clad in very skimpy outfits and
Yeah.
dancing and so in her burlesque act, she is a tiger tamer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this one is totally exciting. It's coming out May 20th this
Oh,
year, but
oh,
it's
oh,
available for pre-order right now on Amazon.
interesting.
So Silver Echoes. And
That's,
she happens to be this woman's gold digger's daughter. So these are
oh,
very different names. Baby Doe Tabor, that was their real name, and
wow.
Silver Dollar Tabor.
Wow.
And they're gold mining people.
And I need to say that you've got amazing, feedbacks, reviews on the books in Amazon. They're quite a lot, a huge one. Readers have really enjoyed it and it's quite beautiful. And that want to make me to go into my next question. One of the most interesting things to me as a writer is to sit back and listen to readers' feedbacks. And you may want to agree with me that one of the things that makes literature to be quite complex in its entirety is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions. And sometimes some readers might get the message intended by the author. Sometimes they might be far from getting the message, and at times They might hilariously misunderstand the message and interpret the books upside down. As interestingly fun as they sound, I would like to ask you, how would you feel when readers interpret your work slightly different from what you intended it to be? How does that make you feel?
Well, how does it make me feel? I find it really interesting, like you do,
Yeah.
that like what did they get out of it? And reading it before it comes out so that you can actually find out what people think of it. And it helps. It helps a lot, especially this is a very complicated book because she has have you ever heard of a split personality?
Yeah, split personality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they used to call it. Now, today it's called dissociative identity disorder. And that's true that this woman had multiple personalities. So that's a
Wow.
hard, that's a hard book to write. And how
Yeah.
are people going to take it? And some
Yeah.
very tough things happened to her during this. And how will they take that? Will they think it's too much? Is it too, so it's good to have pre-readers, which they call
Mm.
beta readers, so that you can
Yeah.
get a feeling for what are people going to think of this,
Yeah.
because it kind of touched on tougher subjects
Yeah.
than I usually write about. Like I've been writing about champagne and all that, but this is kind of tougher. Like she is struggling with her own mind. So I love listening to reviews and hearing reviews and reading about reviews because it gives me an idea of, how people take things. Like this one, you talked about Secret Life of Mrs. London.
Yeah.
Jack London, who is that famous author, he's a tough guy. He's an egotist and he's a genius. So it's
Oh,
like a
wow.
Picasso. He's a Picasso of writing. And it's very difficult for his wife to deal with him. And
Mm.
so I have a lot of people react negatively to him, in the book. And
Yeah.
that's what they're writing about in their review, that they don't like this picture of Jack London.
Mm.
But that's what his wife, I got my information from her diary. And when I
Wow.
do all the research, I get it from history. So I'm digging, digging, digging for the historical, the truth, and then try to write a story that is the truth. But other people may not see it that way. Of course,
Yeah.
our world, we don't all see the truth the same way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to realize that as an author that people are going to be, they're going to see it different ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's amazing, really. That's really amazing. I love your take on that. And now, just apart from the books we've mentioned so far, I know you've talked about this already. I wanted to ask again, apart from the books we've mentioned so far, do you have any other works you've authored that we've not covered or say currently working on?
Well, I told you that I'm working on the next Bollinger,
Yeah.
and that one will be out in October, I think. I
Wow.
hope. It takes me sometimes 2 years to write a book. But I've
Wow.
been writing these two for a long time together, different
Wow.
at different stages. And so
Oh,
this one, I'm still proofreading and all that stuff. That's why the paperback isn't out yet. But so
yeah.
I'm still working on Silver Echoes. And in fact, since I told you there are two personalities in this book, one of them is Silver and one of them is Echo, and that's why they're together, and the true story about this woman. So I always was fascinated with those split personalities and how does that happen and
Yeah.
how do they deal with it and what do
Yeah.
they know about it. So this has been fun for me. So those
Wow.
two books I'm working on this year.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And I like the fact that you've got quite a lot ongoing, really. Now I'm being tempted to ask you in general. I know we've talked about inspirations towards the book individually. I wanted to ask you again, what particularly prompted you to write in this category? I mean, in this genre, which I think is not really that common. How did you get started with discovering champagne, having love for it, and eventually thinking you need to make a book around it and around this woman writing an autobiography? about them?
This genre of books that I write is
Mm.
called biographical fiction.
Yeah.
So if you were on Amazon and searching for books about real people, novels about real people, it would be called biographical. And it started with this book, which was my first one.
Oh.
And I wanted to write about Charmian London, the wife of Jack London, because I knew she was very talented and she never got the credit
Mm.
for all of his books. So Jack London wrote 50 books in 15 years,
Oh,
which is,
wow.
as an author, I can tell you is impossible. How did he do that? He had her. And so
Mm.
I wanted to write a book about her and her incredible talent. She was his editor. She took dictation. She practically wrote half of them and she never got her due. So that's what
Mm.
started me on
Well,
that genre of thinking about women who didn't get their place. You know, they didn't get to be talked about. And so
yeah.
that's exciting. And there are more and more books about real women that people are writing novels about. And
Yeah.
why do they have to be novels? Because when you read my books, they really have a story. You really get to experience it from
Yeah.
that woman's perspective.
Yeah.
And a nonfiction book can't do
Yeah.
that. You know, nonfiction just
Absolutely.
has to say the facts, what
Yeah.
happened, and
Yeah.
it's very dry. So it doesn't give the heart and soul of the person.
Absolutely. I can relate to that wholeheartedly. That's very true. I love your take on this, really, Rebecca. Very beautiful. I can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Your description is quite beautiful, very amazing, compelling, one adding ones to a chair. And I'm really intrigued, really. Take another glass. That's beautiful. Go on, yeah.
Voila.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I love your take on that. Yeah. And as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing and writing a book, especially in your genre? And also, where can interested viewers get a copy of your book from?
Okay, the my big advice is that you have to love the subject that you're writing about
Yeah. Mm.
because you're going to be with that and rereading it. I probably read these books that I write 50 times before they're done. And
Mm.
it's very tedious kind of thing. You know,
Yeah.
it goes from being a general idea to being very tedious, like proofing this for the 100th time.
Yeah.
So you have to love what you're writing or just forget
Absolutely.
it. And the more you love it, the more you want to continue to work on it.
That's true. I mean, it for everybody that write books, the love has to be there. You have to love and enjoy what you write, and of course, that is what push you to complete what you started. If you don't love something, you feel redundant, you feel reluctant to even continue or start it or finish it up. But if the love is there, if the passion of the topic you talk about is there, be like, oh, I've got a lot to do. I need to finish the story. I need to finish this book. I got
And
to do this.
yeah,
You
and for
must.
me, writing about these women, it's almost like I'm making them a promise to
Yeah.
tell their
Oh, wow.
story.
I love that
You
statement.
know, and so you have to make sure that you're doing the best you can to tell what they were feeling and what they had to go through.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's an amazing one, too. That's an amazing one. And where exactly can interested viewers get a copy of the book from?
The easiest place is Amazon. So you can get all my books on Amazon.
That's great. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Rebecca Rosenberg book directly on Amazon, on Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also on other platforms. I also left a link to our social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for accepting the invitation. I enjoyed this conversation thoroughly, more than exciting, it's educative, it's lovely. Thank you so much for introducing me to these three lovely, amazing women. And
Remember, champagne has a lot of water in it.
yeah. Thank you. That's a lovely remembrance. I'll keep that in the back of my head.
Okay. Next time you have a chance to have a glass of
Yeah,
champagne,
I
do
would
it with
love
me.
to. Next time we're having
Okay.
an interview, I'd love to have a glass of champagne close by.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye bye, Peter. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. This is very great. I enjoyed it.